Okay, here is the last video lecture for the psychological theory stuff. Again, same deal, taking notes on this stuff. Now, this is the last slide that you saw. We left the behaviorist theory and the idea of measuring behaviors. Now we're back to the idea of thinking again, and really the unconscious mind, if you will. Psychodynamic theory comes from the ideas of Sigmund Freud. And Freud basically says the mind has two separate components. The conscious, which is what you are aware of. Conscious means aware. And the unconscious, which means things that you're not aware of. And Freud argued that a lot of our behavior is influenced by unconscious forces, things we're not aware of. And his methodology was psychoanalysis. The way that you uncover unconscious behaviors is through this process of psychoanalysis, which is pretty intensive therapy. Once you uncover unconscious drives, then you can fix the problem, according to Freud. Now, psychodynamic theory, this is a theory of mental events that specifies the continual push and pull interaction among conscious and unconscious forces. So he was basically saying you've got this constant push and pull between what you are aware of and what you are not aware of, and these things impact how we function. If you want to jot that down. Now, again, the idea of unconscious is important here, and very simply, unconscious. When we talk about the unconscious mind, we're talking about not being aware. There are forces. I think it's fair to say that sometimes things impact us that we're not aware of. There could be a problem that you've had with a relationship, or just something going on. You can't really identify what it is, but it's just nagging at you. You're not really thinking about it. You're not aware of it. But it can still impact you. It can still impact you in a negative way. Now, Freud talks a lot about defense mechanisms. Okay, defense mechanisms are things. These are things that we all use to help protect ourselves. They're protective. If you're defensive, you're protecting yourself. Okay, so a defense mechanism, according to Freud, and by definition, write this down, is we're talking about our unconscious attempts to keep ourselves from dealing with emotional pain or consequences. Okay? Defense mechanisms are unconscious attempts that we make to keep ourselves from dealing with emotional pain or consequences for some kind of behavior. And the key again here is that they are unconscious. We're not really aware that we're doing it. And I already talked about denial a little bit. And denial, while the functionalists would use this as an example of how we use thinking to protect ourselves, it's also something Freud says that we use that kind of protects ourselves. Again, denial in terms of your relationship status. Someone breaks up with you, you don't want to accept it. The death of a loved one. Immediately when you discover a loved one is dead, you don't want to deal with that. You don't want to accept it. You're in denial. We've all been in denial probably about one thing or another. It serves a protective function for us. We don't want to hear that something is wrong with us, or that something bad has happened, or that maybe we got fired because we were a crappy employee. No, it has to be somebody else. It wasn't my fault. Maybe I had a crappy supervisor. Or the reason I failed that test was because my teacher stunk. It wasn't because I didn't study. It helps us stay safe emotionally. It helps us and keeps us from taking responsibility at times. Here's another defense mechanism, displacement. Sometimes it's easier to take your aggression and your frustrations out on a safer target as opposed to confronting the real problem. And this is something we do unconsciously. If your teacher or your boss or your parents have made you mad, they've made you angry, you can't always confront them because there are consequences for doing that. So what a lot of people will do is they'll take out their frustrations on something else that's safe. I've seen people punch lockers, kick doors. You see the baseball player throwing his hat and his bat because the umpire made a call he didn't like. He can't punch the umpire, but he can slam his bat down. You can kick walls and punch things as opposed to actually hitting the people who make you mad. This is displacement. It might relieve frustration, but it doesn't really solve the problem. And it's something that we just kind of do to protect ourselves because it's safer to do that than it is to go after the real people causing the problems. Compensation is another defense mechanism that I've seen used a lot, especially in therapy situations. The example I always use in class, which is a true story, I had a guy in therapy. He was probably closing in on 50. He had lost his hair, had gained a lot of weight, and the attention that he could always get from girls was quickly going away. He was losing his ability. He was losing his moxie, so to say. He was losing his ability to attract the women that he liked, and he was having real problems with it. And what he decided to do was to buy a really, really expensive sports car. He bought a Lamborghini that he couldn't afford, by the way. And I asked him why he did this, and he really didn't know why. He just kind of thought he needed a change in his life. Well, come to find out, where he couldn't grow his hair back, he wasn't able to lose weight, he could not recapture his youth. He thought that if he had a big Lamborghini, a nice big sports car, I guess that would somehow attract the women. He could somehow get attention from girls that way. Well, the sad irony is that it didn't work. Did not work, and now he has a car payment that he can't afford. So a lot of times we compensate. If we feel that we're like maybe too big, then we may overcompensate by wearing a lot of makeup. Okay? Or if people feel that they're unintelligent, they may try to overcompensate by using big words that they really don't understand. So we all engage in these compensatory mechanisms to minimize the pain and the suffering that we have to go through. One of my favorites, rationalization. This is what I call the everybody else does it syndrome. Cheating, for example. I would ask you in class, and I think I did the first day, how many of you have ever cheated on a homework assignment? Yeah, all of you probably. Everyone has done it, and that's when people get caught. That's one of the first things that you hear. Well, everybody cheats. Why am I being singled out? Everybody does it. It can be in terms of a homework assignment or a test, or even in terms of a relationship. Infidelity is a real big problem with relationships, and when confronted, oftentimes people will say, well, I'm not the only one who cheats. Everybody does it. So that's what rationalization is. I don't have to deal with the consequences of my behavior if I'm a cheater, if I just say, well, everybody does it. Why am I any different than anybody else? I'm not really that bad, and I don't have to deal with the consequences of my behavior. Intellectualization is another defense mechanism, according to Freud, that we use. And again, these are all things that we do unconsciously. We're not aware that we're even doing it. Sometimes it's, instead of dealing with the consequences or with the emotional pain of, let's say, a breakup, then what I could do, instead of dealing with the pain, trying to accept the fact that I was inadequate as a boyfriend or whatever, or a husband, I could do a research paper on failed teenage romances. I could intellectualize the whole thing and turn it into like an academic exercise. That keeps me unattached, it keeps me unemotional, and that way I don't have to deal with the pain of the breakup. So that's yet another defense mechanism that we can use. One of my favorites is projection. And probably the best example of projection I can think of is this. We all have biases, we have issues with things, and instead of owning our issues and owning our own prejudices, we project them onto other people. The best example I can think of has to do with homosexuality. I remember being in college many years ago, about your age, maybe a little older, and I happened to be hanging out in the music department. I was a music major for a little while, and just so happens that a lot of the people who were in the music department were gay. Go figure, I know, right? Which was fine. Did bother me. And I never will forget, we had a guy who was an aspiring music major, but he was also very vocal. He was very outspoken against homosexuality, which we all thought was kind of strange, because we all kind of had a feeling that he might be gay himself, but that's another story for another day. So what he would do is he would sit around all day and he would point out the characteristics in people that he thought were gay, and would talk about why he thought they were gay and why that was just the awfulest thing in the world. And he would talk about it incessantly, to the point where a lot of us finally got offended and were like, look, gay or not, people are people, what's the deal? Come to find out, a couple years later, he came out and was gay, and is still gay, I assume. So what he was doing was classic projection. Instead of dealing with the fact that he was gay and dealing with the emotional turmoil and the pain that was going to be associated with him coming out, he thought it would be easier just to point it out in other people. So that was a safer way to do that, and it was an unconscious attempt on his part to do that. Humor. A lot of times people, without realizing it, will make fun of themselves, their shortcomings, their mental health problems. I'm certainly not making fun of Alzheimer's, but this is an example. I may have Alzheimer's, but hey, I meet new people every day. Or I may have Alzheimer's, but at least I don't have Alzheimer's. So obviously the person's making fun of themselves. He's making fun of himself here. So sometimes we use humor. If somebody pokes fun at us or says something that hurts our feelings, instead of acknowledging the pain openly, we'll turn it into a joke. We're like, yeah, right, I know, I'm a dork, or yeah, whatever, I'm fat, or whatever. Turn it into a joke, it deflects the pain, and then people move on to the next topic. So these are all things that we use, all mechanisms that we use at one time or another unconsciously. And Freud says the only way to get past the problems is to figure out what those unconscious issues are. And a lot of times it takes a lot of work to do that. Now, your book talks about other schools of thought or other theories. I gave you the 4 major ones. There's a nice chart table, or rather a table in your textbook, and I've just scanned it and put it on my PowerPoint here. Structuralism, functionalism we talked about. Behaviorism we talked about. We also talked about psychodynamic theory. There are others. There's Gestalt, humanistic theories, and I don't want to bog you down with this, but just kind of understand the other theories in your book, have a basic understanding of those. Focus more on the 4 that I presented to you, especially for test purposes, but be familiar with the others as well in your book. And we're going to call that the end of this part. Thank you very much.